Today we're going to be learning Bava Batra Daf Lamed Aleph. I'm going to be away for the next month, so all the shiurim will go up as usual, but they'll go up earlier in the morning, and there will be no Zoom classes for the next month. Okay, we'll start up back at the end of August, and dedications for the next while will only be able to be in writing because most of the shiurim I recorded in advance. So if you have dedications, you can send them in and we'll put them up on the website and the podcast details and the WhatsApp groups, but they won't be announced in class as usual. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. Ze omer shel avotai v'ze omer shel avotai. We're at the top of our daf. Each of us claim that the land belongs to it's our ancestral land. Okay, let's go with Ruth and Naomi. Naomi says it was my father's. Ruth says it was my father's. Now, they each bring two different kinds of proofs. Naomi brings witnesses that said it belonged to her parents, to her father, and she has proof of it, like a document. And Ruth brings evidence that it belonged that she lived there for 3 years and nobody complained. Chazaka. So each has a proof that the land is theirs. I'm a rabba. Now, remember, Ruth, you can only have a chazaka if your claim has a basis of how you got there. Now, the problem is that there's witnesses that contradict Ruth's claim. So theoretically, she doesn't really have a claim that it belonged to her parent, her father. Let's just say go with father, because Naomi has witnesses that belong to her father. So Amar Rabba, she does have a claim, Rabba says. Why? Malo l'shakir. We must believe her because we have a concept that if we think she's lying, then she should have chosen the best lie possible. What would have been a better lie? If Naomi has witnesses that the land belonged to her fathers, and let's say Ruth, it really didn't belong to her fathers, well then Abaye, if she wanted to, she could have said, it's very nice you're bringing a proof that your father owned the land. I agree with your father owned the land, but I bought it from your father. And I've been living there for 3 years. So there you have it, right? My proof that I bought it is I'm living here for 3 years. Nobody kicked me off. The fact that Ruth didn't say that, but instead said it was my ancestors, then basically she must not be lying, because if she was going to lie, she would have chosen a better lie. Sounds like a good claim if you believe this Mali L'Shaker. Well, Amale Abaye says, and then that basically brings back her claim. Her claim to how she got to the land works. Because again, chazaka is only good if you have a legitimate claim to how the land came into your possession. Amale Abaye, Mali L'Shaker b'mkom edim lo amrinan. You can't use that she could have done a better lie argument when there's witnesses testifying against her claim. Naomi's witnesses say the land belongs to Naomi's parents. So how could Ruth claim the land belonged to her parents when Naomi has a proof that it belonged to her parents? So while we might say she could have chosen a better lie, but we can't believe her when there's witnesses against her. The Mali, the Shakir, is not strong enough to override witnesses' testimony. So Rava ends up agreeing with Abaye, and basically what do? They say, Naomi, you got the land because you have proof that it belonged to your fathers, and we don't believe Ruth's proof that she lived Shnei Chazaka because it's a claim that it's a Chazaka that has no claim. Hadar Amrle, but the story continues. Ruth comes along and now says, In Davatachi, you know what? I admit in the end, Naomi, that really the land belonged to your parents. I never really meant what I said. Uzavanta, but I bought it, Minach. I bought it from you. Now, you say, well, if you bought it and it wasn't that you inherited it, then why did you lie and say it was inherited? Well, Ruth says the reason I said it was my father's. What I meant was, I'm so sure I remember the day I bought it. I know I bought it. I'm so sure of my claim that it's as if it's been in my property forever and I inherited it. That's all I meant when I said it was my father's. I didn't mean it was my father's. I just said it's so mine. It's as if it belonged to my father. This is a bit of a weird interpretation. Could we really accept this or not? To'en v'chozer v'to'en. Can you claim something, change your mind, and then make a different claim? But again, you can't make a completely different claim, but can you adjust your claim and say that's not really what I meant? Oh, ein to'en v'chozer v'to'en. Or do we say you can't do that? Once you made a claim, you can't just start reinterpreting what your claim was. So we're going to have a machloket. Ulla amal to'en v'chozer v'to'en. Ulla says you're allowed to do this. So we believe Ruth. In which case, right, what's going to happen? Well, right now each of them has a claim to the land, a legitimate claim to the land. So we can't let Yomi have it by herself because Ruth also has a legitimate claim. Nehardea amre eino to'en v'chozer v'to'en. In Nehardea, they say you can't do this. Okay, once you make a claim, you can't start reinterpreting your claim. Now we're going to have that Ulla agrees to Nehardea. Nehardea, by the way, is a place. It's not a person. What does it mean? It means the rabbi who lived in Nehardea said this. So now we're going to have each side agrees with the other side in two cases. So Ulla is going to say, even though I think that you can change your claim, but Mode Ulla, he admits to the other side, to Nehardea, that if Ruth had said in the beginning, her claim was it's my father's field and it didn't belong to your father, where that clearly is contradicted by witnesses, then Ruth would not be able to readjust her claim. There is no readjusting. This land was not your father's. And then she says, oh yeah, this land was your father's. I bought it from them. And if she was in the court and didn't make a claim, and then she went outside the court, and then comes back later into the court, and makes a new claim, meaning you can only do it if you're still in the court. What's the concern? If you leave the court and then later come back and change your claim, my time, what's the reason we don't believe you? We're worried that someone outside the court gave you some advice, your family member, friend, a lawyer, right? And said, oh, well, I can get you out of this. Here, just say this and that will work legally, but we assume that it's not true. This is like an interesting approach to looking at lawyers. You know, when lawyers tell you something, is that they're trying to kind of override the law and play with it and get you what you want, even though it's not necessarily the truth. Or they're really trying to help you. You might not have known that you could do that claim, and then they're actually helping you, and then it seems unfair. So what if you got advice? Maybe you didn't know any better. So it's an interesting, right, point that the Gemara is making about Ulla, whether we all agree with it or not, and whether it also depends on the situation. But you can understand the logic. And on the flip side, Nehardea agrees that if she said, it was my father's, but they bought it from your father's. In other words, it's very nice, Naomi, you brought proof that it belonged to your father's, but my father bought it from your father's. So I don't disagree with you, and your witnesses don't contradict me because my father bought it from your father. And then, for sure, that's accepted, even according to the ones who don't think you can change your words, because she's not really changing so much. Because again, Ruth just said, I inherited from my father's. What she's adding is, oh, and my father's bought it from your father's. Now, what if Ruth meets Naomi outside of court before they even get to the court? And Naomi says, it's my father's. And Ruth says, it's my father's. And then, and then Ruth comes into the court and says, it's mine and I bought it from your father's. Nehardea would say Ruth is believed. Why? This is a great line. My time, I'm very real. People don't tell their claims to the other side before they get to court because it's to their disadvantage. You want the other side not to be knowing where you're going with your arguing because then they can prepare and know what to say, and you want to shock them a little. So you made a claim that wasn't really the case, but that was just to trick the other side into believing that was going to be your claim. They say, oh, great, I've got it all worked out. And then in court, you surprise them and say, oh, yeah, I agree it's your father's, but, I bought it from them. So Amar Amemar, and now the final line of the sugya, Amemar says, Ana Nehardea Ana. I actually come from Nehardea, where they don't think you can be choser v'to'en. You can't reinterpret your words. But Sfira leads to to'en v'choser v'to'en. Even though I'm from Nehardea, I actually hold like Ulla, the other side. And in fact, Hilchata to'en v'choser v'to'en. This is the halacha that you can redo your claim. Reinterpret it. Okay, that was case one. We're going to have basically two cases today. Case two. With similar about both cases. First of all, they both claim it belonged to their fathers. They also have two stages where the first stage was one thing, and then the second stage, something else happened after the rabbi's tribe ruling. Then there was a bit of a change in the case and what evidence they had. So now each one claims, and in this case, it wasn't the evidence, it was just Ruth changed her claim a little bit, right? And said, this is really what I meant. And the question was, do we accept that or not? So now we have Naomi saying, it's my father's. Ruth says, it's my father's. So Naomi brings proof. Number one, that it belonged to her parents. Number two, that she lived in the land for 3 years without anyone complaining. And Ruth brings witnesses that say she lived in the land for 3 years. Now we're talking about the same last 3 years. So what we have here is contradictory testimony. We have two witnesses saying Naomi was living in the land the last 3 years, and two witnesses that say Ruth was living in the land the last 3 years. Rav Nachman. So we're now going to have a machloket Rav Nachman Rava what to paskin here. Rav Nachman said, okay, achila lebahade achila. So about eating shnei chazaka for 3 years, using the produce for 3 years, that clearly contradicts. So we neutralize, erase it on that side, erase it on that side. So Ruth is left with nothing. What's Naomi left with? She still has witnesses that say it belonged to her father. So, okay, Araba cheskarafatan. Naomi gets to live in the land because she's the only one with proof now. Amale Rava, Haidu Mokesheti. Says, what do you mean? Those Eidim were knocked out of the court because other witnesses contradicted, which means they're, 50-50 chance they're lying. How do we accept the other half of their testimony that it belonged to her father? It seems like if they're kicked out for lying or potentially lying, then we should kick them out entirely. To which Rav Nachman answers back, and with this will turn Talmud bet in the middle of the sentence, just because they were contradicted about the chazaka, that doesn't mean they were contradicted about the fathers. Meaning, we split their words. It comes up in other sugyas. There's this concept of plagin and dibure. We can say we believe this, we don't believe that. Okay, so part of the testimony was knocked out, the other part is accepted. Not Rav Nachman thinks it's fine. Rava doesn't think that's okay. If you knock out part of the testimony, then we don't take these witnesses at all. Now they're going to suggest that the machloket Rava and Rav Nachman, before we get to the second level of what happened in this case, the second stage. But first we're going to discuss this machloket Rava and Rav Nachman. We're going to suggest that they have the exact same machloket that Rav Huna and Rav Chisda have in a different case. Lema Rava Rav Nachman beplugta de Rav Huna Rav Chisda kamiflage. Perhaps they're arguing about the same machloket that Rav Huna and Rav Chisda are arguing about. To Itmar, as it was said, we have two contradictory witnesses, so we throw them out of court. No one's accepted. The question is, what if they come up before the court in a different case? Amar Rav Huna, because we don't know. One of them is lying, one of them is not. So again, 50-50 chance. Maybe they're lying, maybe they're not. Rav Huna says, which is going to be just like Rav Nachman, Zoba bifnei atzma u'miida, v'zoba bifnei atzma u'miida. They can each come into a court in a different case and testify, and we can accept it. Because as long as we don't know for sure they're lying, they're false witnesses, we can accept their testimony in a different situation. Why do I want to get involved with potentially lying witnesses? I'm not going to allow, and here the main thing is Rav Chisda is going to say, I'm not going to allow their testimony in court to allow someone to have to pay someone else money, because we have a concept, if you want to take money, right? Okay, leave the money in the hands of whoever it is until we have good proof otherwise. Well, if we have witnesses who are potentially liars, we're not going to allow them to get somebody to have to pay the other side. So Rav Chisda says, look, we don't know for sure. 50-50 chance they're lying. We're not going to accept their testimony in a court. So Lema Rav Nachman Dama Rav Huna Rava Rav Chisda. So very simply, Rav Huna and Rav Nachman both say we accept their testimony in other things. So we'll accept it also here in this case about the second part of what they said, or the first part of what they said. And Rava says like Rav Chisda, which is if they're potentially liars, we're not going to accept their testimony. However, the Gemara is going to say it's not so clear-cut that this is the case, that it breaks down along the same lines. Because we could distinguish between that case and this case. So first they say, Aliva de Rav Chisda kol yamalo pligi. If you view it with Rav Chisda, the Rav Chisda in this case said, maybe you're lying and therefore we don't accept your testimony in a different case. We certainly aren't going to accept the testimony in this case, which means that only Rava can fit with Rav Chisda. There's no way to explain Rav Nachman as fitting in with Rav Chisda, because Rav Nachman thinks we can believe in this case. Of course, we can believe in a different case. However, kipligi aliba de Rav Huna, but perhaps Rav and Rav Nachman both agree with Rav Huna, and they just disagree about, is Rav Huna's case applicable here? Why not? Well, Rav Nachman ke Rav Huna. Rav Nachman anyway just simply fits with him. Both of them think, we're not sure if you're lying, so we'll accept your testimony. The Rava could say the following: Ad kan lo ka'amar Rav Huna ela le'edut acheret, aval lo ta'edut lo. Rav Huna only said what he said regarding some other case. What Rav Huna said is, if you're knocked out of court for a particular case, then because there were contradictory witnesses, then we'll accept you for some other case, but not for this case. In this case, it's Rava, right? In this case, Rava says, if you lied about or you might have lied about the chazaka, we're not going to accept your testimony on the same case about, you testified for Naomi. Maybe you're just lying for Naomi. So we're not going to accept your testimony for Naomi, but we might accept you right? So when Rav Huna said, he only said it for a different case. But for this they do it, maybe Rav Huna would think you also don't accept it. And therefore, Rav Huna could theoretically line up with Rava as well. So it's not so clear-cut that it's the exact same. Look, it's possible, but it's not so clear-cut. Hadar Sade, stage 2 of the case. So again, Ruth said, let's just review. They both said that it was their father's land. And then Naomi brought proof that it was her father's land and she lived there for 3 years. And Ruth brought proof that she lived there for 3 years. So the 3 years gets knocked out. Ruth is left with testimony was her father's. No more than that, though. Ruth doesn't have any testimony. And sorry, I hope I said it right. Naomi's the one who has testimony about the father's land. And therefore, Rav Nachman said to Naomi, you get to live in the land. However, Ruth then finally finds witnesses that can testify that it belonged to her father. Now we have contradictory testimony about whose father did the land belong to. Amar Rav Nachman, Ana achtine, ana maskinane. Look, we told Naomi she could go get the land, that it was hers based on the evidence we had at the time. Now we have new evidence, which basically shows that neither has any testimony, which means that we're going to kick Naomi out of the land, and then she and Ruth can just fight it out because there's no way to know who's right. And he adds the following thing, which is going to cause a big stir. I'm not worried that people are going to say, oh, what a flimsy, what a whimsical court. What, one day they say it's Naomi's, the next day they take it away from her. And it's a huge problem in Judaism and in any system of law to start questioning the court, right? We have to keep a certain respect for the court. And if we start playing with that and the court starts saying, oh, I made a mistake there, we're going to have a huge problem. People are not going to believe the courts anymore, and they're not going to do what the courts say. So, right, people will lose confidence in the courts. You know that from current events, right, where people in general, there's issues in some courts of people not trusting what the motivations of the judges are for the decisions they make and all that, right? You have to be very careful. Once we have a breakdown and the courts can't decide things, or people, they can't implement their decisions, it creates a big problem in society. So he says, I'm not worried about that. It doesn't concern me. Well, Mativ Rava again questions him, or perhaps Item or Rabbi Zera. Maybe it wasn't Rava, it was Rabbi Zera. Shnayim omrim met, ushnayim omrim lo met. We're now moving to a different case. We have a Braita. In this Braita, we have a woman whose husband is missing. 2 people say he's dead, and 2 people say he didn't die. Okay, how you say he didn't die, right? Either we saw him somewhere, or maybe when the people said that he died, it was in some year, and we saw him after that year, or whatever it might be. Or 2 people say she's divorced, and 2 people say she's not divorced, and the husband's not around to know whether she's divorced or not. This is generally what we call an aguna situation. The woman has to be, right, we have to be concerned that maybe she's a married woman. And Hareza Lotina says she can't get married because we have no witnesses. In other words, this woman was known to be married, and now we don't know that she's not married. We don't know if he's dead because we have contradictory witnesses. We don't know if he divorced her, and it's case number 2 because we have contradictory witnesses. But if she gets married, we don't insist that she gets divorced. And once she's already married, since anyway we're not sure, so we let it go and we let her stay married. Rabbi Menachem but Rabbi Yossi, and his opinion is going to be the important one. Omel Teitzei. This is what he means. If she got married and she wasn't supposed to get married, well, because now we don't know if her husband's still alive or not. She has to get out of this marriage. She might be a married woman sleeping with a man. That's serious stuff. She has to get divorced. But Amar Rabbi Menachem but Rabbi Yossi. Now here's the critical part. When do I say she has to leave the marriage? Bizman shabau edim v'achar kach niseit. If witnesses came, okay, now the assumption here is witnesses came, okay, who said he didn't die. And she went ahead, okay, this is what the Rashbam says. Okay, achronim sha'amru lome. And then she got married, lefichach tetzei, because she got married when it wasn't even permitted for her to get married. So then she definitely has to get divorced. Okay, because that's what Rabbi Nachman said. If she went against the law, and then even though later witnesses came and said he's dead, we don't accept that to allow her to stay married. She has to get divorced. Aval niseit, but if she got married according to the court, now this is the important case. The court ruled she could get married because two witnesses came and said your husband's dead or your husband divorced you. Then she got married, which was permitted. And now new evidence comes up. Harezo lo tetzei. She can't get divorced, or she doesn't have to get divorced. Why? Because if we do that, right, the court ruled you can get married, and then the court's going to rule you can't get married. That's going to create pandemonium. People are going to say, what kind of whimsical court? First they say yes, then they say no, and therefore she stays married. Remember, anyway, it's all a doubt. So there's reason to say she could stay married, but he's concerned for zilut debate. And I want to just point out, obviously, that we have a problem on the flip side. If we allow the court, if we don't allow the court to change the ruling when new evidence comes up because of the zilut debating, that could backfire and cause zilut debating also, because now the debating isn't doing truth, because when the truth actually comes to light and they don't change their ruling, it creates a bit of a problem. So you could see both sides. And that's why Rav Nachman is not concerned for that, because perhaps he thinks that this won't cause zilut debating. It's not like he's worried people will be misal, but to actually go against truth is worse for a court. Whereas Rabbi Nachman thinks, right, if we undo what the court says, it's going to be a problem. So now, based on this question, Rav Nachman actually concedes, and he says, listen, Amarle, I was going to rule based on my thinking that once the court, right, we don't care that the court ruled, now we have new evidence. We're going to take Naomi off the field because it doesn't belong to her anymore than it belongs to Ruth. She doesn't have any evidence. But Hasha do utivtan, the fact that you questioned me you, and Otvin Rav Hamnuna Basuria, in other words, both you, which is either Rabbi or Rabbi Zera, brought this braita against me as a question, and also Rav Hamnuna in Syria brought also that same braita as a difficulty to me. Lo avdina beuvada. I'm not going to rule based on what I think. Okay, and I'm basically going to leave it as is. We let Naomi go. Now we have new evidence. We're going to leave Naomi in the field. However, the story continues. This has a third stage. In the end, nafik avaduvada. In the end, Rav Nachman did change the ruling, even though in the beginning he didn't. Some people think that this is in a different case. That in a totally different case, he didn't care about zilzul beit din. Mandechaza, those who saw him do this, thought that he just made a mistake, because didn't he say before, I'm concerned for zilut debating based on this braita? But velohi, it's not really true. Elamishum detalia ba'ashle rafravi. It's that he hung himself on strong ropes. That's a way of saying he was relying on big poskim before him who ruled this way. We're going to have to wait till tomorrow's daf to fully see this, but we're going to start the sugya in which we're going to see this, but we won't see the connection yet today. Ditna. So it says in the following Mishnah in Ketubot, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we're going to have three opinions in this braita. The Mishnah, and the second and third are going to be the ones that are going to interest us. Ein ma'alin lekuna al pied echad. If you're not sure if someone's a Kohen or not, we don't allow one witness to testify that this person's a Kohen, to allow him, number one, to eat truma, number two, to work in the temple, number three, to do the birkat kohanim, the blessing of the kohanim. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, when is this true that you can't use one witness? B'makom sheyesh orarin. That's if people think this person's not a Kohen. But b'makom she'en orarin, if no one's complaining and no one thinks this person's not a Kohen, we can trust that we assume if no one's complaining, probably this person's Kohen, and as long as we have one witness to prove it, that's enough. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Askan. Okay, the Skan was the Skan of the Kohen, so it's interesting, it's connected. But anyway, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel quotes Rabbi Shimon, the son of the Skan. We can use one witness. So now the Gemara thinks, Rashba kind of Rabbi Elazar, it sounds like they're saying the same thing, because Rabbi Shimon ben Askan is not going to say we allow one witness when there's overeen and people saying he's not a Kohen. Like, let's say you have two witnesses. One person's testimony is not going to override two witnesses. So how do we explain this? Maybe it's that there's a debate between them. What if one person comes and claims he's not a Kohen, there's not two, there's only one, and then one person says he is a Kohen, one is going to say we accept it and one is not. Which one's which? Rabbi Elazar savar ir echad. Rashbam savar ir tre. Rabbi Elazar is going to say if ir echad, right? Bimkom sheyesh ir echad, then 1 second. I would assume I'm just getting confused for a minute. Right? Havi ir. Right. Ir echad, according to Rabbi Elazar, is enough of an error that we're not going to accept one witness to say he's a Kohen. You're going to need two. And Rashbam, who seems to be more lenient and says you can be ma'alim al piyed echad, says only if there's ir tre, two people go against you and testify you're not a Kohen, then one is not going to be enough. But generally, we will accept one against one. But if you say that, right? Do you accept one ir or do we not take it seriously? You can't say that. We're already on the next page, but I'll just finish the line. Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that everyone agrees? There's no such thing as an ir or pachot mishnayim. If one person comes and says this person is not a Kohen, nobody takes that seriously. So that can't be the machloka between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel. We're left with waiting to see tomorrow. What is this machloket? And therefore also what is, right, actually not tomorrow because the daf will go up right after class, but basically the question is going to be who was Rav Nachman relying on when he said, I have who to rely on, that we're not concerned for zilzul of the baiting, for disrespect for the court. So what we did today was two cases. The first case started off with a mali l'shaker. Do we accept that? And we said in the end, mali l'shaker doesn't work in the face of edim. And then we said, well, then the case continued, right? We had each of them, one brought edim that was their fathers, the other brought edim that was a chazaka. The one who brought the edim chazaka also said it was their fathers, and then they reinterpreted. Do we accept a reinterpretation? And then we got into the machloka between Ulla and Nehardea about it. And then each one admitted to the other in two situations that either you can or you can't be, reinterpret your claim. Then we had two people said it was their fathers, and then they brought contradictory witnesses about chazaka, and only one had witnesses it was their fathers. And then the question became, can we keep the witnesses, the witnesses' testimony about the fathers being at the father's land when they were already knocked out of court as possible liars on the other part? And that was the big machloka Rava and Rav Nachman. Does that match up to the machloka Rav Huna or Rav Chisda? Possibly yes, possibly no. And then the story continued, and they got more witnesses, and then they wanted to throw Naomi off the land because even the witnesses that were left, according to Rav Nachman, were now contradicted by Ruth's witnesses. So the question became, do we change the ruling or can we not change the ruling because we're concerned for zilzul of the court, disrespect of the court? For that, we saw either Rava or Rabbi Zera disagree with Rav Nachman, and then we saw that Rav Nachman even changed his position, but then seemed to change it back. And the question is on what basis? And we're going to have to wait and see that in the next step. With that, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.